What's the first image that comes to your mind when you hear the word Viking? It's probably a hulking barbarian in a horned helmet, leaping from a longship with an axe in his hand. But what if I told you that image is almost completely wrong? The horned helmet is a total myth, an invention of a 19th century opera. And while raiding was a real part of their world, for most Norse people, life wasn't a constant saga of battle. It was a daily struggle and triumph of farming, crafting, trading, and raising a family in one of the world's harshest environments. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're peeling back the layers of myth to uncover what it was really like to live, work, and die in the world of the Vikings. To understand the Vikings, we first have to step inside their homes. The quintessential Viking dwelling was the Longhouse, or longhus. This wasn't just a house. It was the nucleus of Norse life, a self-contained universe that sheltered family, farmhands, and even livestock all under one massive roof. Imagine a long, narrow building, sometimes stretching over 80 meters, or 270 feet in the case of a powerful chieftain. The walls were gently curved, giving it a ship-like, whale-back appearance that helped it stand strong against fierce northern winds. The building materials depended entirely on what was nearby. In forested regions, the frame was timber, with walls made of woven branches plastered with a mix of clay, straw, and dung, a technique called wattle and daub. But in treeless places like Iceland and Greenland, the walls were made from thick blocks of turf, laid in a herringbone pattern. These walls could be over a meter thick, providing incredible insulation against the brutal winter cold. Inside, there were no windows. The heart of the home was the long, rectangular fire pit that ran down the center of the main living area. This was the only source of heat, light, and cooking. The atmosphere was thick with smoke which escaped through a single hole in the turf roof, permanently blackening the rafters. The floor was just hard-packed earth. Along the walls ran raised wooden platforms that served as communal benches during the day and sleeping areas at night. There was no privacy. Life was crowded and communal, a pungent mix of wood smoke, cooking stew, unwashed bodies, and, in winter, the smell of animals. That's because one end of the longhouse was often a byre, a section for housing the cattle and sheep. This might sound strange to us, but it was a stroke of genius. The body heat from the livestock helped warm the entire building, saving precious firewood. These smoky, fire-lit evenings were the social hub of the Viking world, a time for mending tools, spinning wool, and, most importantly, for storytelling, where the great myths of Odin and Thor and the deeds of ancestors were passed down through generations. So if they were mostly farmers, what did they actually eat? The Viking diet was a testament to their resourcefulness. The everyday meal was humble but nourishing. Most people ate 2 meals a day. The staple was often a porridge, called grot, made from hearty grains like barley and oats, or a perpetual stew called skalls, bubbling away in an iron cauldron over the central fire, with new ingredients added daily. This was eaten with dense, coarse bread and a wealth of dairy products. Cattle were highly prized, not just for meat but for milk, which was turned into butter, cheese, and a thick, tangy yogurt called skyr that's still popular in Iceland today. This was supplemented by a wild harvest. Men hunted elk, reindeer, and wild boar. They scaled treacherous cliffs to collect seabird eggs. And, of course, they fished. The North Atlantic was full of cod and herring. These fish were preserved to survive the long, dark winter. The most important method was drying. Cod was hung on massive wooden racks where the cold, dry wind would turn it into stockfish, a food as hard as a board that could last for years. They also salted, smoked, and even fermented fish and meat. One infamous example is hakaro, a fermented Greenland shark whose flesh is toxic when fresh but becomes edible through this process. As for drinks, the universal beverage was ale. Everyone drank it, including children, as the brewing process made it safer than water. The iconic drink we associate with them, mead, was a high-status luxury. It's an alcoholic drink made from fermented honey, and since honey was scarce, mead was saved for the feast. And the feast was a critical part of Viking society. It was how a chieftain showed off his wealth and secured the loyalty of his warriors. Feast tables were piled high with roasted pork and beef, the ale flowed freely, and the chieftain's precious mead was passed around in ornate drinking horns. It was here that a lord became a ring-giver, rewarding his followers with treasure won on raids, converting wealth into the social capital of loyalty and fame. Just as we've gotten their diet wrong, the popular image of the Viking as a grimy, fur-clad savage couldn't be further from the truth. Archaeology and contemporary accounts reveal a people who cared deeply about their appearance. In fact, one English chronicler in the 13th century complained that Danish Vikings were far too popular with Anglo-Saxon women because they combed their hair every day, bathed every Saturday, and changed their clothes frequently. The Old Norse word for Saturday literally means washing day. Archaeologists constantly find personal grooming kits containing tweezers, razors, ear spoons, and most of all, combs made from bone or antler. The Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan even described Viking men he met on the Volga River, bleaching their beards to a saffron yellow. And their world was surprisingly colorful. They were masters of natural dyes. Madder root produced a vibrant red, and the woad plant created a rich blue. These dyes were expensive, so a brightly colored tunic was an immediate statement of wealth and status. Men's clothing was practical and layered. A wool tunic, trousers, and long strips of wool, called leg wraps, wound from ankle to knee for warmth and protection. Over it all, they wore a large rectangular wool cloak, fastened on the right shoulder with a large pin leaving their sword arm free. Women's clothing was even more distinctive. The base layer was a long linen underdress. Over this, they wore the iconic hangrock, or apron dress. This was a tube of wool suspended from the shoulders by two straps fastened at the front by a pair of large, ornate oval brooches. These tortoise brooches were a woman's most important jewelry, often highly decorated and passed down through generations. Often strings of glass and amber beads were strung between the brooches. A married woman's status as mistress of the household was symbolized by the keys she wore, hanging from one of her brooches. She was the key bearer, the manager of the farm's wealth. And some Vikings took body modification to an intimidating new level. Dozens of male skulls found in Sweden have deep, horizontal grooves filed into their front teeth. Researchers believe these grooves might have been filled with pigment, like red or black, to create a terrifying grin in battle. This carefully managed appearance was all part of a deeply stratified social order. Viking society was divided into three classes, poetically described in the myth of the god Heimdall. At the bottom were the thralls, or slaves. A thrall was not a person under the law. They were property, who could be bought, sold, or killed by their owner. Most were captives from raids in Britain, France, and the Slavic lands. They performed the hardest labor, and their children were born into slavery. The backbone of society was the carls, the class of free men and women. This included everyone from independent farmers and craftsmen to the warriors who made up a raiding party. A carl had the right to own land, bear arms, and speak at the local assembly, known as the Thing. At the very top were the jarls, the aristocracy of chieftains and kings. A jarl's power came from land, wealth from trade and raiding, and personal charisma. He was a military leader, a judge, and a religious figure who had to constantly prove his worth through success in battle and generosity to his followers. Within this rigid structure, the position of free women was surprisingly strong compared to other parts of Europe. A woman could inherit property, she kept ownership of her dowry in marriage, and, crucially, she had the right to initiate a divorce. But what about the legendary Shieldmaiden? For centuries, these female warriors were dismissed as pure literary fantasy. That debate was turned on its head in 2017. Scientists did a DNA analysis on a spectacular 10th-century warrior grave from Birka, Sweden. The grave was filled with a full set of elite weapons: sword, axe, spears, and the skeleton was confirmed to be biologically female. This doesn't mean shield maidens were common, but it forces us to accept that some women could achieve the status of a warrior. The world of the Vikings may feel distant, but they left personal, intimate traces behind for us to find. In the heart of Istanbul, in the magnificent Hagia Sophia Cathedral, Viking mercenaries serving as the Byzantine emperor's elite bodyguard carved graffiti into the marble railings. One inscription simply reads, "Halfdan carved these runes." It's a simple human message that collapses 1,000 years in an instant. Halfdan was here. It is this combination of the grand and the personal that makes them so fascinating. By looking past the myth of the horned helmeted raider, we discover a world far more complex and compelling. We find a society of resourceful farmers, skilled artisans, and ambitious traders. Their lives were shaped by the seasons, their homes were smoky hubs of community, and their social structure was a rigid hierarchy of Jarl, Carl, and Thrall. The Viking expansion, with its famous raids and explorations, wasn't the sum of their existence. It was the spectacular result of this domestic reality, a society driven by a need for land, a desire for wealth to gain status back home, and a culture that prized fame above all else. Their legacy is woven into our modern world, in our language, our place names, and even our DNA. They were not one-dimensional barbarians, but a resourceful and complex people whose story is a timeless tapestry of the mundane and the magnificent, the farm and the fjord, the hearth and the horizon. So what are your thoughts on this? Does this change your perception of the Vikings? Let us know down in the comments below. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.